The vultures circled overhead like harbingers of death, as Jack Morrison rode across the dusty expanse of southern Arizona territory, his eyes fixed on the wagon sitting motionless in the middle of the trail. It was October of 1883, and the heat still clung to the earth like a stubborn fever. He urged his stallion forward, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip, though something told him this was not a situation requiring gunfire. As he drew closer, he could make out a figure slumped against the wagon seat, and his heart quickened its pace. The horses that should have been pulling the wagon were gone, likely stolen or scattered, and whoever was in that wagon had been sitting in the merciless sun for God only knew how long. Jack approached cautiously, his years of riding the range having taught him that even the most innocent-looking situations could turn deadly in a heartbeat. When he pulled up alongside the wagon, he saw her clearly for the first time, and the sight made his chest tighten. A young woman, no more than 22 or 23 years old, sat with her head bowed, her dark hair matted with sweat and dust. Her dress, once a pale blue, was now stained and torn. But what caught his attention most were the two small bundles in her arms, wrapped in what appeared to be flour sacks. Babies, twins from the look of it. "Madam," Jack called out, his voice rough from days without much conversation. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's head lifted slowly, and Jack found himself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes he had ever seen. They were dulled by exhaustion and desperation, but there was a fierce determination in them that spoke of an inner strength that had not yet been broken. "Water," she croaked, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Please, they need water." Jack dismounted immediately, grabbing his canteen as he climbed up into the wagon. He moved carefully, aware that sudden movements might startle her. "Easy now," he said softly. "I've got water, let me help you." He held the canteen to her lips first, and she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. After a few moments, she pulled back. "The babies," she insisted. "They have not had anything in so long." Jack looked down at the two small faces peeking out from the makeshift wrappings. They could not have been more than 6 months old, their faces red from the heat, their cries weak and pitiful. He dampened his bandana and carefully wet their tiny lips, watching as they sucked desperately at the moisture. The woman watched him with those intense green eyes, assessing whether he was a threat or salvation. "What is your name?" Jack asked as he continued to tend to the babies, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the small creatures. "Theresa," she whispered. "Theresa Sinclair." "These are my children, Emma and Elijah." "Vincent Hayes," he replied, meeting her eyes. "But everyone calls me Jack. What happened here, Mrs. Sinclair?" Her face crumpled slightly at the title, and Jack immediately knew he had touched on something painful. "It is Miss Sinclair," she said quietly. "Their father, he was my husband, but he passed 4 months back. We were heading to Douglas to meet up with my sister, but yesterday morning a group of men came upon us. They took the horses, most of our supplies. They would have taken more if I had not hidden the babies under the false bottom of the wagon and convinced them I was traveling alone with nothing of value. They left me here to die." Jack felt a surge of anger course through him, his jaw clenching. He had seen plenty of evil in his 30 years on this earth, but leaving a woman and 2 babies to die in the desert was a special kind of cruel. "You are not going to die," he said firmly. "Not today, not like this. Douglas is about 2 days' ride from here, but we will make it. I promise you that." Theresa looked at him with such hope and relief that Jack felt something shift in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. He had been alone for so long, drifting from ranch to ranch, never settling, never letting anyone get too close. But looking at this woman and her babies, something primal and protective awakened in him. "I cannot ask you to do that," Theresa said weakly. "You have your own journey, your own life. We have already taken enough kindness from you with the water." Jack shook his head, his mind already made up. "You will never be alone again," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him, a vow that surprised even himself with its intensity. "I will get you to Douglas, and I will make sure you and these babies are safe. That is my promise to you, Theresa Sinclair." Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the dust on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you." Jack set about rigging his horse to the wagon, working quickly despite the heat. He fashioned a makeshift harness from rope he had in his saddlebags, knowing it would not be pretty, but it would get the job done. As he worked, Theresa tried to nurse the babies, but Jack could see she was too dehydrated herself to produce much milk. He would need to get them to civilization fast, or those little ones were not going to make it. The thought spurred him to work faster. Once he had the horse secured, Jack climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Theresa. "We need to move during the cooler hours," he said. "I will drive through the evening and night, rest during the heat of the day tomorrow, then push through again. Can you hold on for that long?" "I can hold on for whatever I need to," Theresa said, and Jack heard that steel in her voice again. This was a woman who had survived her husband's death, giving birth to twins likely without much help, and then being robbed and left to die. She was stronger than she looked. As they started moving, the wagon creaking and groaning beneath them, Jack kept stealing glances at the woman beside him. In better circumstances, cleaned up and healthy, she would be beautiful. Hell, even now, covered in dust and exhaustion, there was something about her that drew him in. Her profile was delicate but strong, her chin set with determination even as she swayed with fatigue. "Tell me about your husband," Jack said after they had been traveling for an hour, wanting to keep her talking and alert. "If you want to, that is." Theresa was quiet for a long moment, and Jack thought perhaps he had overstepped. But then she spoke, her voice soft and sad. "William was a good man. We married when I was 20, and he promised me a better life out west. He was a farmer, wanted to buy land and build something of our own. But he got sick shortly after we crossed into Arizona. Something in his lungs. He held on long enough to see the babies born, held them both in his arms and told me to be strong. Then he was gone, just like that." "I am sorry," Jack said, and he meant it. "That must have been hell." "It was," she admitted. "But the babies needed me. I could not afford to fall apart. My sister married a rancher in Douglas 3 years ago. She has been writing to me, telling me there was a place for us there. I sold everything we had left to buy that wagon and those horses. I thought if I could just get to Douglas, we would be safe. But I suppose the universe had other plans." "The universe did not leave you out here," Jack said firmly. "Evil men did that, and evil men can be dealt with." "I do not want revenge," Theresa said, looking at him with those green eyes. "I just want my children to be safe. I want them to grow up somewhere they do not have to be afraid." "Then that is what we will give them," Jack replied. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped mercifully, and Jack kept the wagon moving at a steady pace. His horse was strong and experienced, used to long rides, and seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. Theresa dozed fitfully beside him, the babies cradled in her arms. Every so often, one of them would whimper, and she would wake instantly, soothing them with soft words and gentle touches. Jack found himself mesmerized by her as a mother. He had never given much thought to family or children. His own upbringing had been rough. His father had been a drunk who beat him regularly until Jack was big enough to hit back. He had left home at 15 and never looked back, making his way as a ranch hand, occasional bounty hunter, and whatever else would put food in his belly and a roof over his head. He had always told himself he was not the type for settling down, that he was too damaged, too rough around the edges. But watching Theresa with her babies, he felt something shifting inside him, old walls beginning to crack. "You are good with them," Jack said quietly, not wanting to wake her fully if she was sleeping. "They are all I have left," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "They are everything." "You have got more than you think," Jack said. "You have got grit, and that counts for a lot out here." Theresa opened her eyes and looked at him in the moonlight. "You are a kind man, Jack Hayes. I did not think there were many of those left." "I am not kind," Jack said, uncomfortable with the praise. "I am just doing what is right." "That is the definition of kindness," she replied with a small smile. They traveled through the night, and as the sun began to rise again, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, Jack found a small outcropping of rocks that would provide some shade. He pulled the wagon into the shelter and helped Theresa down, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her. She was so light, too light, and he realized she had probably been rationing the food, giving most of it to the babies. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" Jack asked as he spread out his bedroll in the shade for her to rest on. "I do not remember," Theresa admitted. "Before William died, maybe." Jack dug through his saddlebags and pulled out strips of jerky and some hardtack. It was not much, but it was food. "Eat," he commanded, "all of it. You cannot take care of those babies if you starve yourself." "But you need it too," she protested. "I will be fine," Jack said firmly. "I have gone longer without food. You need your strength, especially if you are nursing." Theresa took the food with shaking hands and ate slowly, savoring each bite. Jack watched her, then turned his attention to the babies. They were starting to stir, their small fists waving in the air. He picked up the little boy, Elijah, with careful hands, amazed at how something so small and fragile could exist in such a harsh world. "You are a natural," Theresa said, watching him with a soft expression. "I have helped birth plenty of foals and calves," Jack replied with a slight grin. "Figured babies cannot be that different." "They are a bit different," Theresa laughed, and the sound was like music. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and Jack decided right then that he wanted to hear it again and again. They rested through the worst of the day's heat, taking turns watching over the camp and sleeping. Jack found himself studying Theresa as she slept, the way her dark hair fell across her face, the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was younger than him by several years, but she had lived through enough hardship for 2 lifetimes. He wondered what kind of future she hoped for, what dreams she still held on to. When the sun began its descent, Jack woke her gently. "We should get moving again. If we push hard, we can make Douglas by mid-morning tomorrow." Theresa nodded, sitting up and immediately reaching for the babies. They had slept peacefully in the makeshift bed Jack had created for them from his spare blanket, nestled in the wagon's bed. As she gathered them up, one in each arm, Jack felt that strange pull in his chest again. This feeling of wanting to protect, to provide, to be something more than just a drifter passing through. They continued their journey as twilight descended, the sky turning brilliant shades of purple and gold. Theresa sat beside him, more alert now after some food and rest. The babies were fussy, hungry, and uncomfortable, but she did her best to soothe them. "Tell me about you," Theresa said after a while. "You know my sad story. What is yours?" Jack was quiet, not used to talking about himself. "Not much to tell," he said finally. "Born in Texas, left home young, been working ranches and odd jobs ever since. Never stayed in one place too long." "Why not?" Theresa asked, genuinely curious. "I guess I never found a reason to," Jack admitted. "It is easier to keep moving than to put down roots and risk losing them." "That sounds lonely," Theresa said softly. "It is," Jack agreed, surprising himself with his honesty. But it is safe. Safe from what? She pressed gently. Jack was silent for a long moment, debating how much to share. But something about the darkness and the intimacy of the moment made him want to open up. My father was a mean drunk. Took his anger out on me and my mother until I was big enough to fight back. By then, my mother was so beaten down, she did not even try to leave with me when I ran. I sent her money when I could, but she died a few years later. I have not let myself get close to anyone since. Figured it was easier that way. Theresa reached over and placed her hand on his arm, the touch sending electricity through him. I am sorry you went through that. No child should have to experience such things. It made me tough, Jack said, trying to dismiss the sympathy in her voice. Made me able to survive out here. It also made you alone, Theresa said. And being alone is not the same as being strong. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Here was this woman who had every reason to be bitter and broken, and yet she was reaching out to him with compassion and understanding. You are wise beyond your years, he said quietly. Suffering does that, she replied. It either breaks you or teaches you. I chose to let it teach me. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, the only sounds being the creak of the wagon, the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves, and the occasional cry from one of the babies. Jack found himself acutely aware of Theresa's presence beside him, the way she would lean against him slightly when fatigue overtook her, the soft scent of her despite the dust and sweat. He had been with women before, brief encounters in various towns that meant nothing beyond a night's pleasure. But this felt different. This felt like something real, something that could matter if he let it. As the night wore on, Theresa began to talk more about her dreams for her children. She wanted them to have education, to learn to read and write. She wanted them to know kindness and love. She wanted them to have opportunities she never had. Jack listened, adding his own thoughts occasionally, surprised to find himself imagining being part of that future. Your sister, Jack said eventually. Tell me about her. Margaret, Theresa said with a smile in her voice. She is 5 years older than me. She always protected me when we were children. Our parents died when I was 15, and Margaret was already married by then. She took me in, but I felt like a burden, so when William came along and showed interest, I married him quickly. Maybe too quickly. I did not really know him, not truly, but he was kind enough and he offered me a way forward. Did you love him? Jack asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. Sorry, that is not my business. It is all right, Theresa said. I cared for him. He was a good man, a gentle man. But love? I do not know if I ever really had the chance to find out. We married, we were intimate, I got pregnant, and then he got sick. Our whole marriage was maybe 18 months from start to finish. I was his wife and I tried to be a good one, but I cannot say my heart was ever truly engaged. I feel guilty about that sometimes. You should not, Jack said firmly. You did the best you could with the circumstances you were given. Did you ever love anyone? Theresa asked, turning the question back on him. Jack thought about it for a long moment. No, he said finally. I do not think I have. I cared for my mother, but that is different. As for a woman, romantic-like, I never let myself get that close. Never, Theresa sounded surprised. Never, Jack confirmed. Always seemed like a complication I did not need. And now, she asked softly. Jack looked at her in the moonlight, at this woman who had stumbled into his life just yesterday and had already turned everything upside down. Now I am not so sure, he admitted. Theresa held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then one of the babies started crying in earnest, breaking the moment. She turned her attention to little Emma, who was wailing pitifully, clearly hungry and uncomfortable. Theresa tried to nurse her, but Jack could see it was not working well. We will get to Douglas soon, Jack said, as much to reassure himself as her. "Your sister will have milk or formula, proper food for them." "I hope so," Theresa said, her voice tight with worry. "I do not know what I will do if something happens to them. They are all I have left of William, all I have left of hope for a better future." "Nothing is going to happen to them," Jack said with conviction. "I give you my word on that," and he meant it. In the short time he had known this woman and her babies, they had become important to him in a way he could not fully explain. Maybe it was the protector in him, the part that had always stood up for those who could not defend themselves. Or maybe it was something more, something that scared him with its intensity. Dawn was breaking as they finally saw the outskirts of Douglas. The town was small but growing, a product of the mining boom that had hit southern Arizona. Jack had been through here once before, a few years back, and it looked like it had doubled in size since then. Buildings lined the main street, a mix of false-fronted stores and saloons with houses and ranches spreading out beyond. "We made it," Theresa breathed, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe we actually made it. Where does your sister live?" Jack asked. "The Greenwood Ranch," Theresa said. "It is supposed to be a few miles east of town." Jack guided the wagon through the quiet streets of the early morning, getting directions from a shopkeeper who was opening up for the day. The Greenwood Ranch turned out to be a respectable spread, with a large house, several outbuildings, and cattle grazing in the distance. As they approached, a woman came out onto the porch, her hand shading her eyes against the rising sun. "Theresa," the woman called out, her voice uncertain. Then she was running, her skirts flying, calling her sister's name with joy and relief. Jack pulled the wagon to a stop, and Theresa was climbing down before he could help her, the baby still in her arms. The two sisters met in the middle of the yard, both crying and talking over each other. Jack watched from the wagon, feeling suddenly like an outsider, like his part in this story was coming to an end. Margaret Greenwood was an attractive woman in her late 20s, with the same dark hair as Theresa but more filled out, healthier looking. Her husband, a tall, weathered rancher named Robert, came out of the barn and stood nearby, a smile on his face at the reunion. After several minutes of tears and exclamations, Margaret finally turned to look at Jack. "You brought her here," she said, walking over to him. "You saved my sister and her babies." "I just gave them a ride," Jack said, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Theresa said, coming over to stand beside her sister, the baby still in her arms. "Not everyone would have. Most people would have ridden on by, not wanting the burden. Jack Hayes saved our lives." Margaret looked between her sister and Jack, and something knowing flickered in her eyes. "Then you must stay for breakfast at the very least. Robert, help Mr. Hayes with his horse." Jack wanted to refuse, wanted to ride out and put distance between himself and these feelings that were threatening to overwhelm him. But Theresa was looking at him with those green eyes, silently pleading with him to stay, and he found he could not say no to her. Inside the ranch house, Margaret immediately took charge, getting Theresa and the babies cleaned up and fed. She had milk from their cow, which the babies drank greedily from rags dipped in the precious liquid. A proper feeding bottle would need to be purchased in town, but for now, this would do. Jack sat at the kitchen table with Robert, drinking strong coffee and eating eggs and bacon that tasted like heaven after days of jerky and hardtack. "You are a good man," Robert said quietly, "so the women in the other room would not hear. Not many would have done what you did." "I could not just leave them out there," Jack said. "Still, you did not have to, and I saw the way you look at her," Robert added with a slight smile. "I looked at Margaret the same way when I first met her." Jack shifted uncomfortably. "I am not the settling down type." "I said the same thing once," Robert replied. Then I met Margaret, and suddenly settling down was all I could think about. Before Jack could respond, Theresa came back into the kitchen, cleaned up and wearing one of Margaret's dresses. She looked transformed, her dark hair brushed and pinned back, her face scrubbed clean. She was beautiful, and Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. "The babies are sleeping," she said softly, then turned to Jack. "I do not know how to thank you properly. You gave us our lives back." "You do not need to thank me," Jack said, standing up awkwardly. "I am just glad I came along when I did." "Will you stay?" Theresa asked, and there was something in her voice that made Jack's heart pound. "At least for a few days. You must be exhausted and your horse needs rest." Jack knew he should say no, should mount his horse and ride out before this got any more complicated. But looking at Theresa, seeing the hope in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "A few days," he agreed. "Then I need to move on." "Of course," Theresa said, though Jack thought he saw a disappointment flicker across her face. Those few days turned into a week. Robert offered Jack work helping around the ranch, and Jack found himself enjoying the physical labor, the routine of feeding animals and mending fences. But more than that, he enjoyed the evenings when they would all sit on the porch and talk as the sun set. Theresa would be there with the babies, who were thriving now with proper food and care. Jack found himself telling stories of his travels, making Theresa laugh with tales of stubborn horses and narrow escapes. In turn, she shared memories of her childhood with Margaret, painting a picture of two sisters who had leaned on each other through hard times. Jack watched her come back to life during that week. Color returned to her cheeks, her eyes brightened, and her laugh came more freely. She was a natural beauty, but more than that, she was kind and intelligent, with a sharp wit that caught him off guard. They took walks together in the evenings, just the two of them, while Margaret watched the babies, talking about everything and nothing. "I am glad you stayed," Theresa said one evening as they walked along the fence line, watching the cattle in the distance. "Me too," Jack admitted. And it was true. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "What will you do when you leave?" Theresa asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jack had been asking himself the same question. The thought of leaving was becoming less appealing with each passing day. "I do not know," he said honestly. "I have been drifting for so long, I am not sure I remember how to do anything else." Theresa stopped walking and turned to face him, her green eyes serious. "What if you did not have to drift anymore? What if you had a reason to stay somewhere?" Jack's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "What are you saying, Theresa?" "I am saying that I have feelings for you," she said, her voice shaking slightly but her gaze steady. "I know it is too soon. I know it is crazy. I am a widow with two babies, and you are a man who has spent his whole life running from commitment. But I cannot help how I feel. These past days with you have been the happiest I have felt in longer than I can remember. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. You make me feel like maybe there is still hope for happiness in this world. And I am not asking you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know before you rode out of my life forever." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. Everything in him that was used to running was screaming at him to leave, to protect himself before he got hurt. But a newer voice, one that had been growing stronger since he found her in that wagon, was telling him to stay, to take the risk, to let himself feel something real for the first time in his life. "I do feel the same way," Jack said, the words coming out rough and uncertain. "I have been fighting it, telling myself it is just because I helped you that it is not real. But it is real, Theresa. You are the first person who has ever made me want to stop running." Theresa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Then stay. Stay here with us. Robert could use another hand on the ranch, and you could have a home, a real home. The babies already adore you. I adore you." Jack reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I am not an easy man," he warned her. "I have demons, things I am still working through. I do not know how to be a husband or a father. And I do not know how to be a widow starting over," Theresa replied. "But we can figure it out together. That is what love is it not? Choosing to face life together instead of alone." "Is that what this is?" Jack asked softly. "Love? I think so," Theresa whispered. "Or at least the beginning of it." Jack lowered his head and kissed her then, gently at first, then with more passion as she responded. It was not his first kiss, but it felt like it. Felt like everything was new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I am staying," he said, making the decision that would change his life forever. "If you will have me, I am staying." "Yes," Theresa breathed, pulling him close again. "Yes, yes, yes." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when Margaret saw them, she grinned knowingly. "About time," she said. "I have been watching you two dance around each other all week." The next few months were a whirlwind. Jack settled into life on the ranch, working alongside Robert and learning the ins and outs of cattle ranching. He was good at it, his years of experience with animals serving him well. He moved into the small bunkhouse on the property, but he spent every spare moment with Theresa and the babies. Watching the twins grow and develop filled Jack with a joy he had not known was possible. Elijah was a serious baby, his dark eyes always watching and studying everything around him. Emma was more outgoing, quicker to smile and laugh. Jack loved them both fiercely, surprised by the strength of his protective instincts toward these children who were not his by blood, but were becoming his in every way that mattered. He courted Theresa properly, despite Margaret's teasing that they had sort of done things backward, falling in love first and courting second. They took long walks, had picnics, talked for hours about their hopes and dreams. Jack felt himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing parts of himself he had kept locked away for years. Theresa listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding. 6 months after Jack had found her in that wagon, he asked her to marry him. It was not a fancy proposal. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset with the babies playing on a blanket nearby. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band he had bought in town. "Theresa Sinclair," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and a father to those babies? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" Theresa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling that beautiful smile that still took his breath away. "Yes, Vincent Hayes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with just family and a few close friends present. The local pastor performed the ceremony, and Jack felt his hands shaking as he slipped the ring on Theresa's finger. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and told Jack he could kiss his bride, Jack pulled Theresa close and kissed her with all the love and devotion he felt, not caring who was watching. The reception was held in the ranch's large barn, which Margaret and Theresa had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was food and music, and Jack danced with his new wife late into the night. The babies were passed around by doting guests, and Jack felt a sense of family and belonging he had never experienced before. That night, as they lay together in the small house, Robert and Margaret had helped them build on a corner of the ranch property. Theresa traced her fingers along Jack's jaw. "I love you," she said softly. "I never thought I would love again after William, but you have shown me that the heart is capable of so much more than I imagined." "I love you too," Jack replied, still getting used to saying the words out loud. You and those babies are my whole world now. I would do anything for you. You already have, Theresa said, kissing him gently. You saved us and then you gave us a future. That is everything. Their first year of marriage was full of adjustments and learning. Jack had to learn how to be a husband, how to share his space and his life with someone. He had to learn how to be a father, how to change diapers and soothe crying babies in the middle of the night. It was not always easy. There were moments when his old instinct to run would resurface, when the walls would start to go back up. But Theresa was patient with him, understanding that he was fighting years of learned behavior. I am not going anywhere, she would tell him during those moments when he would pull away emotionally. You are stuck with me, Vincent Hayes. For better or worse, remember. And Jack would let her pull him back, would let her love heal the broken parts of him bit by bit. He had never believed in the power of love before, had thought it was something poets made up to sell books. But living with Theresa, he was beginning to understand. Love was not just a feeling. It was a choice, made every day, to stand by someone even when it was hard, to see them at their worst and choose to stay anyway. The twins grew and thrived. Elijah took his first steps at 10 months, with Emma following a week later. They started saying Papa around their first birthday, and the first time Jack heard it, he had to turn away to hide his tears. These children loved him, saw him as their father, and it filled a hole in his heart he had not even known was there. 2 years into their marriage, Theresa told Jack she was pregnant. He was terrified and elated in equal measure, his mind immediately jumping to all the things that could go wrong. But Theresa was calm and confident, having been through it before. This time will be different, she assured him. This time I have you. She was right. When their daughter was born, Jack was right there beside her, holding her hand through the difficult labor. When the baby finally came, healthy and screaming, Jack cut the cord with shaking hands and then held his daughter for the first time. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect. What should we name her? Theresa asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Jack looked down at the small life in his arms, overwhelmed with love and responsibility. How about Grace? He suggested. Because you and these children are the Grace I never thought I deserved. Grace Hayes, Theresa said, testing the name. It is perfect. The twins, now 2 years old, were fascinated by their new baby sister. They wanted to touch her gently, to help with her care. Jack watched his growing family with constant amazement. Just 3 years ago, he had been alone, drifting from place to place with no real purpose. Now he had a wife he adored, 3 children who called him Papa, a home, a purpose. It was everything he had never known he wanted. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jack continued working alongside Robert, and their partnership was strong. The ranch prospered, and Jack felt pride in the work they did. He was good at this, good at building something lasting. In the evenings, the 2 families would often gather together, the children playing while the adults talked. Margaret and Theresa were as close as ever, and Jack was grateful his wife had her sister nearby. When Grace was 6 months old, Robert and Margaret announced they were expecting their first child. The joy in the household was palpable. Margaret had worried she might not be able to have children, so this was a blessing they had not taken for granted. Our children will grow up together, Theresa said one night as she and Jack lay in bed, baby Grace sleeping in a cradle nearby. Just like Margaret and I did, they will have cousins to play with, a whole family around them. They are lucky kids, Jack said, pulling her closer. They have no idea how lucky they are. We are the lucky ones, Theresa corrected. I think about that day in the wagon sometimes, how close we came to dying out there. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know how to pray. You are my miracle, Jack. "You are mine too," he replied, kissing her forehead. "You taught me how to live, not just survive. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." As the years passed, their family continued to grow. Another daughter came 2 years after Grace, and they named her Hope. Then, finally, a son they named Samuel. The house Jack had built was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and it rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. The twins, Emma and Elijah, grew into smart, curious children. Emma loved books and learning, spending hours with Theresa learning to read and write. Elijah was more physical, always wanting to be outside with Jack, learning about the ranch and the animals. Neither child had any memory of William, their biological father, and Jack was the only papa they had ever known. He made sure to honor William's memory, though, telling the children about the man who had given them life, making sure they knew their history. "You loved him once," Jack said to Theresa one evening, wanting to make sure she did not feel guilty about moving on. "I did," she agreed. "In the way you love someone who is kind to you when you need kindness. But what I feel for you is different. It is deeper, stronger, more real. I hope that does not make me a terrible person." "It makes you human," Jack assured her, "and I am grateful every day that you chose me." When Emma and Elijah were 8 years old, Elijah asked Jack a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. They were out mending a fence together, just the two of them, and the boy looked up at his father with serious eyes. "Papa, I know you are not my real father," he said quietly. "I heard some kids in town talking about it. Does that matter?" Jack set down his tools and knelt in front of his son, looking him straight in the eye. "Blood does not make a family," he said firmly. "Love makes a family. I have loved you and your sister since the moment I met you when you were tiny babies in that wagon. I have changed your diapers, walked the floor with you when you were sick, taught you to ride, helped you learn your letters. You are my son in every way that matters. Do you understand that?" Elijah nodded, tears in his eyes. "I love you, Papa." "I love you too, son," Jack said, pulling the boy into a tight hug. "Always." Margaret's son, Thomas, grew up alongside Jack's children, and the cousins were as close as siblings. The ranch continued to prosper, and eventually Jack and Robert expanded, buying more land and cattle. They became one of the more successful operations in the area, known for fair dealing and quality livestock. Jack never forgot where he came from, though. When he would go into town and see drifters or men down on their luck, he would often hire them for odd jobs, give them a meal and a few coins. Theresa understood this about him, understood that he was paying forward the grace he had been given. "You cannot save everyone," she would remind him gently when he would get frustrated by men who did not want to be helped or who took advantage of his kindness. "I know," Jack would reply, "but I can try." One evening, when Jack was 45 years old and Theresa was 38, they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, just like they had done thousands of times before. Their children were grown now. Emma was married to a schoolteacher in town, expecting her first child. Elijah was running part of the ranch operation, having shown a natural talent for the business side of things. Grace was courting a nice young man from a neighboring ranch. Hope and Samuel were still at home, but growing up fast. "Can you believe it has been 15 years since that day?" Theresa asked, her head resting on Jack's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Jack replied. "Other times it feels like a lifetime ago." "Do you ever regret it?" Theresa asked. "Staying, giving up your freedom?" Jack turned to look at his wife, this woman who had changed his entire life. There were threads of silver in her dark hair now, and fine lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting in the sun. She was even more beautiful to him now than she had been that day in the wagon. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and those children gave me a life worth living. I was not free before, Theresa. I was just lost. You gave me a home. You gave me one too, she said softly. I was alone and scared and certain I was going to die. Then you rode up and changed everything. You have given me 15 years of happiness, of security, of love. Our children are thriving because of you. Because of us, Jack corrected. We did this together. Theresa smiled and kissed him gently. Together, she agreed. Life continued its steady pace. Jack became a grandfather when Emma had her first child, a boy they named after him. Holding that baby in his arms, Jack felt the weight of legacy, of the family he had built, of the man he had become. He thought about his own father, about breaking the cycle of violence and anger that could have continued. He had made a different choice, had chosen love and commitment and family, and that choice had made all the difference. Elijah married at 25, bringing his sweet wife Sarah to live on the ranch. They gave Jack and Theresa 2 more grandchildren, twins once again, as if history was repeating itself in the best possible way. Grace married her young man and moved to his family's ranch, while Hope became a teacher in Douglas, following in Emma's husband's footsteps. Samuel, their youngest, decided to try his hand at law, reading for the bar in Tucson. As Jack grew older, he spent more time teaching his grandchildren the things he had learned, passing down the stories of his life. He told them about finding their grandmother in that wagon, about how love had saved him from a life of loneliness. He wanted them to understand that family was not always about blood, that love was a choice, and that choosing to love was the bravest thing a person could do. When Jack was 55, Robert passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The loss hit the family hard. Robert had been like a brother to Jack, and his death was a reminder that time was precious. Margaret moved into a smaller house in town, and Jack and Elijah took over full management of the ranch. Life is so fragile, Theresa said one night, still grieving her sister's husband. We never know how much time we have. Which is why we make the most of every day, Jack replied, holding her close. We love fiercely, we forgive quickly, and we do not waste time on things that do not matter. More years passed, and Jack watched his children have children, who in turn began to have children of their own. The ranch house was always full of family during holidays, with multiple generations gathered around the table. Jack would sit at the head of that table, Theresa beside him, and feel a contentment so deep it almost hurt. This was the legacy he was leaving, not money or land, though there was plenty of both. His legacy was love, was family, was showing all these people that no matter where you came from or what you had been through, you could choose to be better, to love more, to build something that would last. On their 30th anniversary, Jack took Theresa on a trip, just the 2 of them. They rented a small cabin in the mountains and spent a week together, talking and laughing and remembering. They went back to the spot where he had first found her, which was now marked by a large oak tree that had somehow survived in the harsh desert landscape. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Theresa asked as they stood beneath the tree. "I said a lot of things," Jack replied with a smile. "You said I would never be alone again," Theresa reminded him, "and you kept that promise. For 30 years I have never been alone. You have been my partner, my protector, my best friend, my love. You are my everything, Jack. And you are mine," Jack said, pulling her into his arms. "Every day with you has been a gift. I was not living before I met you. I was just existing, just going through the motions. You taught me what it means to truly live." They kissed beneath that oak tree, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a beautiful life together. The desert stretched out around them, vast and unforgiving, the same landscape that had almost killed them. But they had survived, had thrived, had turned what should have been an ending into a beginning. As they grew older still, Jack and Theresa settled into the role of family matriarchs and patriarchs. Their children managed the ranch and the various businesses the family had invested in over the years. Jack's hair turned completely white, and his body, once so strong and capable, began to slow down. Theresa developed arthritis in her hands, making the delicate work she loved difficult. But they had each other, and they had the comfort of knowing their family was strong and united. On a warm spring evening, when Jack was 72 years old, he and Theresa sat on their porch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. They were wrapped in a blanket together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. It was a scene they had played out countless times over the decades, but it never got old. "I have been thinking," Theresa said softly, "about that day you found me. About how terrified I was, how certain I was going to die. I had 2 tiny babies and no hope, and then you appeared, like a guardian angel sent just for us." "I was no angel," Jack chuckled, "just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "You were my angel," Theresa insisted. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope, you gave me love, you gave me a future. Our children have families of their own now, our grandchildren are having babies. We have built something amazing, you and I." "We did," Jack agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Do you remember your promise?" Theresa asked. "That I would never be alone again." "I remember," Jack said. "And I kept it, did I not?" "You did," Theresa confirmed. "And I need you to keep it a little longer. Do not leave me, Jack, not yet. I am not ready to face this world without you." "I am not going anywhere," Jack assured her, though both of them knew that time was not on their side anymore. "We still have years ahead of us, you and me. Years of watching our family grow, years of sunsets on this porch, years of being together." "Promise me," Theresa insisted, pulling back to look him in the eye. "I promise," Jack said solemnly. "You will never be alone, Theresa. Even when I am gone, I will still be with you. You will see me in our children's faces, hear me in their laughter, feel me in the warm breeze on a spring day. I will never truly leave you." Theresa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Jack replied, wiping away her tears. "More than I ever thought possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, twinkling in the darkening sky. The ranch was quiet around them. The cattle settled for the night, the children all in their own homes. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that came from a life well lived. Jack thought about that young man he had been, angry and hurt and running from anything that resembled commitment. He thought about finding Theresa and the twins in that wagon, about the split-second decision to stop and help. That decision had changed everything. It had given him a family, a home, a purpose. It had taught him that love was not weakness, that opening your heart was not a risk but a gift. True to his nature, Jack did not leave Theresa. He lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep with Theresa beside him. The whole family gathered for his funeral, 3 generations of Hayes descendants coming to pay their respects to the man who had started it all. They told stories of his kindness, his strength, his unwavering love for his family. Theresa stood at his grave, their children supporting her on either side. "He kept his promise," she said to anyone who would listen. "He said I would never be alone, and I am not. He is everywhere I look. In our children, in this land we built together, in my heart. I will never be alone because he loved me, and that love will last forever." She lived another 5 years after Jack passed, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of the man who had saved her life, and then spent the rest of his life loving her. She told them about that day in the wagon, about thinking she was going to die, about Jack riding up like salvation itself. She told them about his promise, about how he had kept it every single day for over 5 decades. When Theresa finally passed, peacefully in her sleep like Jack had, they buried her beside him under the shade of a large cottonwood tree on the ranch property. The entire family gathered once again, now 4 generations strong. Emma, now in her 70s herself, spoke at her mother's funeral. "My parents were extraordinary people," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "Not because they were perfect, but because they chose love every single day. My father found my mother and us babies in the middle of the desert, dying of thirst and exposure. He could have ridden on by. Most people would have. But he stopped, and he made a promise that changed all of our lives. He promised her she would never be alone again, and he kept that promise until his dying day. Their love story is one for the ages, and we are all here because of the choice they made to love each other, to build a family, to create something that would last beyond their lifetimes." As the family stood around the grave, the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same brilliant oranges and pinks that Jack and Theresa had watched together for so many years. A warm breeze picked up, rustling through the grass and the leaves of the cottonwood tree. And if you listened closely, you could almost hear the sounds of laughter, of children playing, of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a love that would echo through generations. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they never forgot Jack and Theresa, the cowboy and the widow with twins who had started it all. Their story became family legend, told to each new generation as a reminder that love was powerful, that promises mattered, that one moment of choosing kindness over indifference could change everything. Years later, Emma's great-granddaughter, a writer, would pen a book about her ancestors, about the cowboy who found a woman alone with twins in a wagon, and promised she would never be alone again. The book became a bestseller, touching hearts across the country with its message of love, redemption, and the power of keeping promises. But for Jack and Theresa, wherever they were now, the only thing that mattered was that they had found each other, had loved each other, and had built a legacy that would never die. They had taken a moment of desperation and turned it into a lifetime of love. They had shown that family was not just about blood, that home was not just a place, and that the bravest thing a person could do was open their heart and love without reservation. The wagon where Jack had first found Theresa had long since rotted away, but the oak tree at that spot grew tall and strong, a living monument to the day 2 lives had intersected and changed forever. Sometimes, family members would visit that tree, placing flowers at its base and remembering the story of how it all began. And on quiet desert nights, when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear the echo of a promise made so many years ago. You will never be alone again. 5 simple words that had changed everything. 5 words that had created a family, built a legacy, and proven that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. The desert that had almost killed them had witnessed their triumph instead. The harsh landscape that showed no mercy had been conquered by something even stronger than its brutal sun and unforgiving terrain. It had been conquered by love, by the simple act of one person stopping to help another, by the decision to stay instead of run, by the promise to never let someone face the world alone. And so the story ended not with death, but with life. Life that continued on in children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Life that flourished in the ranch Jack had helped build. Life that bloomed in the love that still connected the family across generations. Jack and Theresa's story did not end when they died. It continued on, woven into the fabric of every descendant's life, a reminder that love endured, that promises kept created legacies, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop when you see someone in need and say, "You will never be alone again."